My name is Fiona, and at 34 years old, I learned that loyalty has a very specific price tag. For 9 years, I quietly paid my parents' bills believing I was protecting our family. But at Thanksgiving dinner, I found their finalized will sitting wide open on my father's desk. They left their entire $1.5 million estate to my older brother, leaving me exactly zero. When I confronted them, my mother called me a selfish spinster who already had too much money. So I smiled, walked out to my car, and pressed a single button on my phone that would bring their perfect world crashing down. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who used you. Growing up in our upscale Connecticut suburb, I was always the reliable one. While my brother Preston coasted through life on his charm and my parents' endless financial bailouts, I worked tirelessly to build my own private equity firm. I sacrificed my 20s to achieve financial independence. I bought my own car, paid my own tuition, and never asked for a dime. My parents, Richard and Patricia, gladly accepted my independence because it meant they could funnel all their resources into Preston. Thanksgiving dinner was playing out exactly like every other holiday gathering at my parents' spacious colonial home. Preston sat at the head of the table next to my father holding court. His wife Monica sat across from him feeding their 3 children and casting condescending glances my way. I sat quietly at the end of the table, enduring the usual subtle jabs about my single status and my obsession with my career. The house felt unusually drafty, so I excused myself to grab my coat from my father's home office. As I reached for my coat draped over the back of his chair, I glanced down at the massive mahogany desk. A thick legal document lay open right in the center. Last will and testament of Richard and Patricia. I did not mean to pry, but my name jumped off the page. I leaned in closer and read the finalized distribution of assets. My heart stopped beating for a full 10 seconds as my eyes scanned the crisp black text. The entire $1.5 million estate, including the house, the investment accounts, and the family heirlooms, was left entirely to Preston. The document explicitly stated that Preston was the sole heir. Then I saw my section. It stated that Fiona is to receive exactly $1 to prevent any legal contest of this document. $1. I stood there in the quiet office, gripping the edge of the mahogany desk until my knuckles turned white. I thought about the past 9 years. I thought about the sacrifices I had made, the massive monthly transfers, the quiet dignity I had maintained while they paraded Preston around as their ultimate achievement. A normal person might have cried. They might have screamed or torn the document into pieces, but my tears had dried up a long time ago. Instead, a cold, sharp clarity washed over me. I picked up the heavy document and walked straight out of the office. I walked back into the dining room where the laughter was loud and the wine was flowing. Preston was in the middle of a story about his latest tech venture, a startup that I knew for a fact was bleeding money. I walked right up to the dining table and dropped the legal document right next to the cranberry sauce. The heavy thud of the paper hitting the wood silenced the entire room. "What is this?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. My father Richard looked at the document and his face immediately turned a deep shade of crimson. He pushed his chair back and stood up, towering over the table. "You had no right to go snooping through my private office," he barked, trying to turn his embarrassment into anger. "You left it wide open on your desk," I replied, crossing my arms. "You left everything to Preston. The estate, the assets, the house. You left me $1. I looked directly into his eyes, waiting for an explanation, an apology, anything that resembled parental guilt. Instead, he doubled down. My father straightened his posture and looked down his nose at me. "Preston is the rightful patriarch of this family," Richard stated coldly. "He has a wife. He has 3 growing children to support. He is building a legacy. You are a single woman obsessed with your properties and your firm. You do not need the money." I stared at him, letting the sheer audacity of his words sink in. Before I could respond, my mother Patricia chimed in from the other end of the table. Her voice was sharp and laced with disdain. "Do not act so entitled, Fiona." Patricia said, waving her wine glass at me. "You are being completely selfish. You should be happy for your brother instead of ruining our Thanksgiving dinner with your petty jealousy." I looked over at Preston. He was leaning back in his chair, a smug smirk playing on his lips. Monica sat beside him, looking utterly triumphant. They all thought they had put me in my place. They thought I would just accept my role as the discarded daughter, the ATM machine, who would continue to fund their lifestyle out of some twisted sense of familial duty. "You think I am selfish?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You think I do not understand family legacy?" "You clearly do not," Richard snapped. "If you did, you would understand that our assets need to be protected and kept whole for Preston children. We are doing what is best for the family. You have always been entirely too focused on yourself." The absolute delusion in his voice was staggering. For 9 years, I had silently carried their financial burdens. For 9 years, I had sacrificed my own peace of mind to ensure they did not lose this very house they were now passing on to the son who had never paid a single bill. And now they were calling me selfish. I did not yell. I did not throw a tantrum. I simply smiled. It was a cold, empty smile that caused my mother to shift uncomfortably in her seat. "I understand perfectly," I said. "You have made your priorities very clear. I hope Preston and his legacy keep you warm at night." I turned on my heel and walked out of the dining room. I grabbed my purse from the entryway and stepped out the front door without looking back. My father shouted something after me, demanding I come back and apologize, but his voice faded as the heavy wooden door clicked shut behind me. The crisp November air hit my face as I walked down the long paved driveway toward my car. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, completely detached from the betrayal that had just unfolded inside. I unlocked my car, got into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. The silence inside the vehicle was deafening. I sat there for exactly 1 minute, letting the reality of their betrayal settle into my bones. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I opened my secure banking application. I navigated past my business accounts and personal savings, straight to the automated transfers menu. There it was. The recurring transaction I had set up when I was just 24 years old. $5,200 scheduled to transfer to Richard and Patricia joint checking account on the first of every single month. It was the money that kept their lights on, kept food on their table, and maintained the illusion of their wealthy suburban lifestyle. I tapped the transfer. The screen prompted me with a question asking if I was sure I wanted to modify the schedule. I pressed cancel. A second confirmation screen popped up warning me that this action would permanently delete the recurring payment. I did not hesitate. I pressed confirm. The screen refreshed, showing 0 active transfers. The 9-year financial pipeline was officially severed. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat, started the engine, and pulled out of their driveway for what I knew would be the last time. I merged onto the main road, heading straight back toward the city, toward my own life. 10 minutes later, my phone screen lit up in the dark cabin of the car. It began buzzing relentlessly. The cancellation had immediately triggered an automatic bank alert to my parents' joint checking account. They were finally realizing that their selfish, discarded daughter was no longer going to act as their silent bank. The urgent notifications kept flashing brightly, but I just kept driving forward, leaving their sinking ship far behind me today. 30 days passed in absolute dead silence. A full month without a single text, phone call, or email from the people who had raised me. In any normal family, the aftermath of a Thanksgiving blowout would inevitably lead to some form of communication, perhaps an apology, or at least a tense attempt at a truce before the December holidays. But the dynamic in my family had never been normal. Silence was their weapon of choice. Richard and Patricia had always used the withdrawal of their affection to punish me whenever I stepped out of line, expecting me to eventually cave under the weight of their disapproval and come crawling back to beg for their forgiveness. I spent the entire month of December throwing myself into my work at the private equity firm I had built from the ground up. I closed deals, managed my portfolio, and enjoyed the profound peace that accompanied the absence of their daily demands. I knew exactly what they were doing. They were waiting for the first of the month, They were waiting for the automated deposit to hit their joint checking account, assuming that my silent departure from their dining room was just a momentary flare of feminine emotion, a temper tantrum that would quickly be forgotten once my ingrained sense of duty kicked back in. They genuinely believed I would never dare to actually cut their financial lifeline. The 1st of January arrived crisp and violently cold. I was sitting at my sleek glass desk in my downtown corner office, reviewing a quarterly projection report when my personal cell phone vibrated against the polished wood surface. The screen illuminated, displaying a new text message from Patricia. I did not immediately reach for it. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee, savoring the bitter warmth before picking up the device. I opened the message. There was no greeting. There was no wishing me a happy new year. There was no inquiry about my health or my life. The text contained exactly 2 sentences. The mortgage is due. Transfer the funds immediately. The sheer audacity of those 9 words radiated through the screen. For 9 years, that automated transfer of $5,200 had cleared on the final day of every month, ensuring the funds were available for them on the 1st. For 9 years, they had never once sent a text to say thank you. Now, a mere 12 hours after the automated payment failed to appear in their ledger, the silence was broken. Not out of love, but out of sheer financial panic. I stared at the message, feeling an icy calm settle deep within my chest. I thought about the Thanksgiving dinner. I thought about the signed will sitting on my father's desk, leaving the entirety of their estate to Preston. I thought about being told I was just a single woman with too much money, a spinster obsessed with her properties, while my brother was crowned the rightful patriarch of a legacy he had never contributed a single cent toward. My fingers hovered over the digital keyboard. I did not type a long emotional paragraph. I did not demand an apology or explain my feelings. I simply typed one sentence. I am not the bank and you are not the owners. I pressed send. Less than 30 seconds later, my phone began to ring. The caller ID flashed with a photo of my parents standing in front of their sprawling Connecticut home, a house I had secretly kept out of foreclosure for nearly a decade. I let it ring 3 times, enjoying the rhythmic vibration against my desk, before I finally swiped to answer. I brought the phone to my ear and remained silent. "What kind of sick game are you playing?" Patricia screamed through the speaker, her voice shrill and entirely devoid of the refined country club elegance she usually projected. "I am sitting at my computer looking at our bank portal, Fiona. The transfer did not go through. Fix it right now. The mortgage company will charge us a late fee by tomorrow." "There is no game," I replied, my voice steady and professional, identical to the tone I used when dismantling a bad corporate merger. "I canceled the automated transfer. I am no longer funding your lifestyle." The line went dead quiet for a fraction of a second as her brain struggled to process a reality she had never anticipated. When she spoke again, her voice shook with raw, unrestrained fury. "You ungrateful, spiteful child," Patricia spat. "You are throwing a tantrum over a piece of paper on your father's desk. You have a duty to this family. You have a duty as a daughter to ensure your parents are cared for. After everything we have done for you, this is how you repay us." I leaned back in my leather ergonomic chair, swiveling slightly to look out at the gray winter skyline of the city. I recalled exactly what they had done for me. When I was 24 years old, working 18-hour days to close my first major real estate deals, I lived in a damp studio apartment and skipped meals to save every dime of my commissions. During that exact same time, Patricia had purchased a brand new luxury SUV, and Richard had upgraded his golf club membership, completely ignoring the fact that their own house was secretly slipping into pre-foreclosure. They had never provided me with a college fund, a down payment, or even a basic safety net. Everything I had I built with my own 2 hands. "You are absolutely right," I said, keeping my tone unnaturally bright and devoid of any warmth. "I am just a single woman with too much money. I am far too emotionally unstable and obsessed with my career to handle the heavy burden of familial duty. You made it very clear that Preston is the rightful patriarch of this family. I think it is only fair that you let the rightful patriarch handle the financial responsibilities. After all, he has a legacy to build. Fiona, do not use my words against me, Patricia shrieked, the panic finally bleeding through her anger. Your brother has a wife and 3 children to feed. He is launching a massive technology startup. He cannot be burdened with our monthly expenses right now. You have the liquidity, you have the disposable income. Stop being petty and wire the money immediately, or I swear to God you will regret it. Before I could respond, I heard the sound of the phone being snatched away on the other end of the line. Richard's booming, authoritarian voice suddenly filled my ear. He used his executive tone, the one designed to intimidate subordinates and force compliance. Listen to me very carefully, young lady, Richard barked. You will log into your bank right now and you will send that money. I will not tolerate this insubordination in my family. You are acting like a spoiled brat because you did not get your way with the estate planning. The estate belongs to the family name, and the family name is carried by Preston. You will fulfill your financial obligations to this household, or there will be severe consequences. I let him rant, allowing him to exhaust his breath. The sheer entitlement was breathtaking. He genuinely believed he could command me to hand over $5,200 a month simply because we shared DNA. What consequences exactly? I asked calmly. Are you going to cut me out of the will again? Because we both know that ship has already sailed. You are testing my patience, Fiona, Richard roared. If you do not wire those funds by 5 o'clock today, you are banned from this family. Do you hear me? You are banned from all future family events. You will not be welcome at Easter. You will not be welcome at summer barbecues. And you will not be welcome in this house until you issue a formal apology to your mother and pay what you owe. You will be entirely cut off from this family. He delivered the threat as if it were a death sentence, fully expecting me to break down and beg to be allowed back into their toxic inner circle. He thought the withdrawal of their presence was the ultimate punishment. He had no idea that I had been praying for an excuse to walk away for years. That sounds like a wonderful holiday gift, Richard, I replied, my voice chillingly polite. Enjoy the consequences of your estate planning. I disconnected the call. I placed the phone face down on my desk and let out a long, slow breath. The silence in my office felt different now. It was no longer the heavy waiting silence of the past month. It was the absolute unburdened silence of total liberation. I had finally severed the parasitic cord that had drained my resources for nearly a decade. My focus returned to the quarterly reports on my dual monitors. I had actual legitimate business to run. But exactly 15 minutes later, my phone vibrated one more time. I flipped it over. The notification displayed a new text message from my brother Preston. I unlocked the screen and opened the message thread. Preston's text was long, dripping with the arrogant condescension that had defined his entire existence as the family golden boy. Finally, showing your true bitter colors, Fiona. The message read, Mom is in tears because of your petty little stunt. You are absolutely pathetic to hold their mortgage hostage just because you are jealous of my position in the family. But do not worry, I am officially taking over the family finances starting today. I am stepping up to protect Mom and Dad from your toxicity. We do not need your money, and we certainly do not need you. Have a nice life alone. I read the text twice, absorbing every single word of his misplaced bravado. Preston was 37 years old, currently failing at his third attempt to launch a technology startup, and heavily reliant on his wife Monica's family connections to maintain his country club lifestyle. He had absolutely no liquid capital to cover a $5,200 monthly payment. But his ego could never allow him to admit that, especially not when the role of the wealthy family savior was up for grabs. He saw an opportunity to solidify his status as the heroic patriarch eager to play the knight in shining armor for the parents who worshipped him. He thought he was taking over a simple monthly bill. He thought he was just going to set up an auto draft from one of his over-leveraged credit accounts and bask in the glory of my parents' endless gratitude. He had absolutely no idea about the massive, crushing reality of the situation he had just boldly volunteered to manage. He did not know that the original mortgage had defaulted 9 years ago. He did not know that the bank had long since sold off the distressed debt. And most importantly, he did not know who actually held the deed to the property he was so desperate to protect. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cool glass desk. A genuine, unrestrained smirk spread across my face as I stared at his message. He wanted to take over the family finances. He wanted to protect them from my toxicity. I decided right then and there to let him try. I locked my phone, slipped it into my desk drawer, and turned my attention back to my work, knowing with absolute certainty that Preston had just unwittingly signed his own financial death warrant. The fallout did not take long to escalate from private family drama to a public witch hunt. By Tuesday morning, the silence in my office was shattered by the relentless ringing of my personal cell phone. Preston had realized the extent of the financial black hole he had just volunteered to fill, and true to form, he immediately weaponized our extended family. He was always a master at playing the victim while pulling the strings from the shadows, letting others do the dirty work of putting me back in my designated place. I watched the screen light up with names I usually only saw during forced holiday gatherings: Aunt Kathy, Uncle Robert, Aunt Sarah. I let the first few go to voicemail, taking a slow sip of my black coffee while reviewing a commercial lease agreement on my primary monitor. When I finally tapped the voicemail icon, the sheer vitriol waiting for me was staggering. First was Uncle Robert. His voice boomed through the speaker, dripping with righteous indignation. He called me a bitter, jealous sociopath who was trying to punish her parents for loving her brother. He actually used the phrase, financial elder abuse, claiming I was starving my mother and father to inflate my own ego. He demanded I call my father immediately and beg for his forgiveness. Next was Aunt Sarah, whose voice trembled with manufactured tears. She said Patricia had called her hyperventilating, claiming I was trying to leave them homeless right before the holidays. Sarah told me I was a disgrace to the family name and that my corporate money had turned me into a cold, unfeeling monster who lacked basic human decency. I listened to each message with clinical detachment. They were perfectly reciting the script Preston and my parents had fed them. I was the wealthy, heartless spinster punishing the loving parents out of pure spite. It was a fascinating study in mass manipulation. They had painted a masterpiece of deceit, and the extended family was buying it without asking a single question. The phone vibrated again in my hand. Aunt Kathy. She was my older sister and the unofficial matriarch of the extended family gossip ring. If there was a narrative to be spun, Kathy was the one weaving the threads. I decided it was time to collect a little more data. I swiped the screen and accepted the call, pressing the phone to my ear. Before I could even say hello, Kathy launched into her attack. Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass and vibrating with absolute fury. "Fiona, I am absolutely disgusted with you," she spat. "I am standing in your mother's kitchen right now and she is a nervous wreck. How can you be so incredibly selfish?" I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Hello, Aunt Kathy. I see Preston has been making his rounds today." "Do not you dare bring your brother into this," Kathy snapped. "Preston is beside himself trying to figure out how to clean up your mess. He just stepped up to take over the estate planning to help your father, and you decide to throw a tantrum and cut off their emergency funds. You have more money than you know what to do with, Fiona. It is sick that you would hold it over their heads." "Emergency funds," I asked smoothly. "Is that what they are calling it?" "Stop playing games," Kathy demanded. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. Preston has been carrying this family for 9 years. 9 years, Fiona. He has sacrificed his own savings to pay their mortgage and keep this roof over their heads while he was trying to build his own business and raise 3 children. And the one single time he asks you to pitch in and cover the bills for a few months while he transitions the estate accounts, you cut them off out of pure spite." The air in my corner office suddenly felt very thin. I stopped breathing for a few seconds as Kathy's words echoed in my ear. "Preston has been carrying this family for 9 years. The magnitude of the lie hit me with the force of a freight train. It was not just that my parents had taken my $5,200 every single month for nearly a decade without a single word of genuine gratitude. It was far worse than that. They had been actively taking my money and telling the entire extended family that Preston was the one paying the mortgage. My mind raced back through years of family dinners, holiday toasts, and casual conversations. I remembered Uncle Robert praising Preston for his generosity at a summer barbecue. I remembered Aunt Sarah telling me I should be more like my brother, who always put family first. I remembered my parents beaming with pride as Preston humbly accepted the compliments, never once correcting the narrative. They had stolen my silent sacrifice and handed it directly to their golden boy, wrapping him in a cape of false martyrdom funded entirely by my bank account. They let him play the hero using my sweat and my capital. "Fiona, are you listening to me?" Kathy barked, her voice rising in pitch as she misread my silence for guilt. "You are going to wire that money right now. You owe it to your brother for everything he has done. He is the only reason your parents still have a home to live in." A hot, searing wave of anger flared in my chest, but I forced it down, locking it away behind a wall of absolute ice. I could have defended myself. I could have opened my banking app, pulled up my statements, and emailed 9 years of transfer receipts to the entire family. I could have exposed the massive lie right then and there, proving that Preston was nothing but a broke fraud and my parents were pathological liars. But I realized in that split second that it would be entirely pointless. They wanted to believe Preston was the savior. They needed me to be the villain because it justified their lifelong mistreatment of me. If I showed them the truth, they would just find a way to twist it, claiming I was attacking my parents or trying to humiliate my brother to ruin his reputation. Explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me was a waste of my time and my energy. So I decided to let them dig. I decided to hand them the shovels and watch them hollow out their own graves. "You are absolutely right, Aunt Kathy," I said, my voice dripping with dangerous calm. "I am a terrible daughter. If Preston has been so incredibly generous for the past 9 years, I am sure he can manage to keep paying the mortgage without missing a beat. Like you said, he is the hero of the family. He does not need my toxic money polluting his legacy." "Fiona, do not you dare hang up on—" Kathy started to scream, but I pulled the phone away from my ear and tapped the red button. I immediately went into my settings and blocked her number. I then went through my contact list and systematically blocked Uncle Robert, Aunt Sarah, and every other flying monkey Preston had dispatched to harass me. The sudden silence in my office was glorious. I set my phone face down on the desk and turned to my computer monitors. The revelation of their 9-year lie had completely erased any lingering trace of familial guilt I might have subconsciously harbored. They were not just entitled, they were actively malicious. They had built an entire mythology of Preston greatness, using my silent labor as the foundation. I opened a secure browser window and logged into the administrative portal for Apex Holdings. This was the blind, limited liability company I had established entirely under my own name a decade ago to manage my private real estate acquisitions. The interface loaded, displaying my portfolio of commercial and residential properties across the state. I clicked on the residential tab and scrolled down to a specific address in an upscale Connecticut suburb. The property my parents called home. The property Preston was currently claiming he had been paying for. As I opened the property dashboard, a bright red notification banner immediately popped up at the top of the screen. It was a priority alert from the advanced credit monitoring service I had attached to the property title to prevent fraud. I clicked the alert and my eyes scanned the incoming data matrix. Someone was running aggressive hard credit inquiries against the property address. A secondary alert pinged indicating that a local commercial title agency had just initiated a preliminary title search on the deed. I leaned closer to the monitor, tracing the digital footprints. Preston was not just scrambling to figure out how to pay a monthly bill he could not afford. He had realized the original mortgage was completely gone, and he was actively trying to leverage the house. He was attempting to use the property as collateral to secure a massive line of credit likely to fund his failing technology startup, while pretending he was just stepping up to manage the estate. He believed that because his name was on the will as the sole heir, he had the right to extract equity from the home to save himself. I sat back in my chair, a slow, dark smile spreading across my face. Preston was trying to mortgage a house he did not own. He was trying to take a loan out against a property that my parents did not own. He was walking blindly into a legal minefield of federal proportions, and he was doing it with the full, arrogant confidence of a man who had never once faced a consequence in his entire life. I reached for my coffee, taking a slow, satisfied sip. Let him run the inquiries, I thought to myself. Let him fill out the paperwork and pay the application fees. Let him promise the private investors the moon and the stars based on an asset he thought was his birthright. Because when that title search finally came back, the golden boy was going to hit a brick wall made of absolute legal titanium, and there would be no one left to bail him out. I sat perfectly still in my leather chair, watching the red alerts multiply across my secure monitor. Every new digital ping was another shovel of dirt my brother was tossing out of his own grave. Preston was actively authorizing hard credit pulls against a house he did not own. He was filling out loan applications pledging collateral that belonged entirely to my holding company. It was a spectacular display of financial illiteracy mixed with staggering arrogance. Right on cue, my personal cell phone began to vibrate on the glass surface of my desk. I glanced down at the screen. The caller ID displayed a professionally taken headshot of Preston. He had paid a public relations firm $5,000 last year to take those photos for a business magazine feature that never actually materialized. I let the phone vibrate for a long moment, savoring the quiet power of knowing exactly what the man on the other end of the line was desperately trying to hide. I swiped the screen and brought the phone to my ear without saying a single word. I simply waited. Fiona, I am glad you finally decided to act like an adult and pick up. Preston's voice dripped with an unbearable level of condescension. He was using his artificial executive tone. It was a voice he had cultivated over years of pretending to be a successful entrepreneur, a voice designed to sound authoritative and commanding. To anyone else, it might have sounded impressive. To me, it sounded like a little boy playing dress-up in his father-oversized suit. I remained completely silent, allowing the dead air to stretch between us. The fundamental rule of negotiation is that the person who speaks first loses power. Preston had never learned that lesson. The silence made him uncomfortable, and his need to dominate the conversation quickly overrode any strategic restraint. I am calling because someone needs to step up and be the adult in the room. Preston continued, his tone growing sharper. Mom and Dad are absolutely devastated by your behavior. You threw a hysterical temper tantrum over a standard piece of estate planning, and then you vindictively cut off their financial support. It is exactly this kind of emotional instability that proves why Dad left the family legacy to me. You are completely emotionally unequipped for the burden of family duty. Women always let their petty feelings cloud their business judgment. You hit a wall the second your ego gets bruised. I leaned back in my chair, resting my hand on the cool glass desk. The sheer magnitude of his delusion was fascinating. He was living off his wife's family money and draining our parents dry, yet he genuinely believed he was a titan of industry, lecturing a self-made millionaire on business acumen. Are you quite finished? I asked, my voice smooth and perfectly detached. No, I am not finished, Preston snapped. You need to understand that the dynamic of this family has officially changed. I am stepping in as the head of the household. I am taking over the estate management to protect our parents from your toxic volatility. It is a heavy responsibility, but as the rightful patriarch, it is my duty to secure the family wealth. I took a slow sip of my coffee. And how exactly do you plan to do that, Preston? He scoffed loudly into the receiver, a sound of pure, unadulterated arrogance. I am currently finalizing the Series B funding round for my tech logistics startup. We are absolutely revolutionizing middle-mile supply chain management using artificial intelligence and predictive algorithms. We are going to disrupt the entire industry, Fiona. The valuation of my company is about to skyrocket. I will personally double the family wealth within 12 months. Dad knows this. Mom knows this. That is why they trust me with the estate. I actually generate wealth while you just hoard rent money from your little properties. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. His startup was a disaster. It was a glorified delivery app that had burned through $2 million of angel investor capital in less than a year. He had no proprietary technology and no actual revenue. He was regurgitating buzzwords he had read in a business blog, trying to sound like a visionary while secretly panicking about how to pay the mortgage he had just bragged to the extended family about covering. "That sounds incredibly impressive," I said, injecting just enough mock admiration into my voice to feed his ravenous ego. "If your company is doing so phenomenally well, then managing a simple monthly mortgage payment should be absolutely effortless for you." Preston hesitated. The silence stretched for a fraction of a second, exposing the tiny crack in his armor. When he spoke again, his voice was tighter, defensively aggressive. "That is exactly why I am calling," he said, pivoting smoothly into his rehearsed demand. "Transitioning the estate accounts and restructuring the family finances takes capital, Fiona. You left Mom and Dad in a massive lurch right before the holidays. You acted recklessly, and now there is a significant cash flow gap while I untangle the mess you created." "A cash flow gap," I repeated, letting the phrase hang in the air. "Do not play dumb with me," Preston barked, losing his artificial composure. "You owe this family for the stress you have caused. I am demanding that you wire $20,000 to my business account by the end of the day." I sat forward in my chair. $20,000. For what exactly? "Consider it an exit fee," he stated, his voice dripping with entitlement. "It covers the missed back payments you owe them, and it compensates me for the time I have to spend fixing your emotional mistakes. You pay the $20,000 as a penalty for your bad behavior, and then you can walk away with a clear conscience. I will handle the family legacy from here on out. If you refuse to wire the funds by 5 o'clock, I will make sure every single business contact we share knows exactly how you treat your own elderly parents. I will ruin your professional reputation, Fiona." The threat hung in the air. He genuinely thought he held all the cards. He thought he could extort me by threatening my public image, believing I was as obsessed with social perception as he and my parents were. He thought demanding a massive lump sum under the guise of an exit fee would intimidate me into submission. For a moment, I simply listened to the sound of his ragged breathing through the phone receiver. He was nervous. He needed that $20,000 desperately to keep his sinking ship afloat, and he thought he could bully his younger sister into handing it over. A soft chuckle escaped my lips. I tried to suppress it, but the absolute absurdity of the situation was too much. The chuckle grew into a genuine deep belly laugh that echoed off the glass walls of my corner office. I laughed until my eyes watered. "What is so funny?" Preston demanded, his voice pitching upward in panic. "This is not a joke, Fiona. I will destroy you." I caught my breath, wiping a single tear of mirth from the corner of my eye. "You want me to fund your failing startup under the guise of a family exit fee?" I said, my tone dropping into a cold, deadly register. "You are not a patriarch, Preston. You are a parasite. You cannot even afford your own car payment, let alone a mortgage." "I am warning you, Fiona," he stammered, his facade completely shattering. "No, I am warning you," I interrupted, my voice slicing through his panic like a surgical scalpel. "You have no idea what you are dealing with. Good luck with your Series B funding." I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the end call button, terminating the connection mid-sentence. I tossed the device onto my desk and leaned back, taking a deep, cleansing breath. The sheer arrogance of the golden child was staggering. He had spent his entire life being told he was exceptional without ever having to prove it, and now he was colliding with the real world at full speed. I turned my attention back to my computer screens. The administrative portal for Apex Holdings was still open. The red alert banners indicating hard credit inquiries had multiplied over the last 10 minutes. Preston was moving fast. He was desperate for capital, and he was pulling every string he could find to secure a loan against the house. I opened my email client to begin reviewing my afternoon meeting schedule. But before I could click on the first unread message, my office intercom buzzed. I reached over and pressed the silver button. "Yes, Sarah," I said, speaking to my executive assistant. "Fiona, I have Gregory on line 1 for you," Sarah said, referring to my lead corporate attorney. "He says it is highly urgent regarding the Apex Holdings portfolio." A sharp thrill of anticipation coursed through my veins. Put him through, Sarah. The line clicked, and Gregory's deep, resonant voice filled the room. Fiona, we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. Go ahead, Gregory, I said, pulling up a blank digital notepad on my screen. My compliance team just intercepted a direct communication from a commercial title agency based in Connecticut. Gregory explained, his tone strictly professional. They are reaching out to the registered agent of Apex Holdings to verify the deed status on the residential property you hold in Fairfield County. I smiled, staring at the digital alert on my monitor. And why exactly is the title agency contacting us, Gregory? Because an individual named Preston is attempting to initiate a massive lending protocol against the property, Gregory stated. The title agency flagged the application because Preston's name does not appear anywhere on the deed or the chain of title. He is actively attempting to secure a $400,000 home equity line of credit against a property that belongs exclusively to your holding company. The words hung in the air, heavy with profound legal implications. Preston was not just arrogant anymore. He had crossed a very distinct line. A home equity line of credit required the applicant to pledge the property as collateral. To pledge the property, you had to legally own it. Preston was willingly and knowingly submitting federal financial documents claiming ownership of an asset he had absolutely no legal right to. Gregory, I said, my voice perfectly steady. Do not block the title agency inquiry. Do not tell them the application is fraudulent yet. Let them continue processing the paperwork. Fiona, Gregory cautioned, a note of warning in his voice. If he signs those final closing documents, he is committing federal wire fraud and bank fraud. He is attempting to extract nearly $500,000 using stolen collateral. I know exactly what he is doing, Gregory, I replied, my eyes locked on the screen. Let him run the entire application. Let him dig the hole as deep as he possibly can. Do not interfere until the absolute last minute. I want him to sign his name on every single dotted line. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Gregory responded. Understood, Fiona. We will monitor the title agency progress and prepare the necessary cease and desist documentation for when you are ready to pull the trigger. I thanked him and disconnected the line. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the bustling city streets far below. Preston wanted to be the head of the family. He wanted to take control of the legacy. He wanted to steal $400,000 out of my property to fund his pathetic tech startup, and he thought he could do it right under my nose. He thought I was just an emotionally unequipped woman who would roll over and let him win. He had no idea that he was walking into a steel trap that I had designed, constructed, and quietly maintained for almost a decade. The game was no longer about a Thanksgiving dinner insult or a canceled monthly transfer. The golden boy had just escalated this to a felony, and I was going to let him burn. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the reality of my brother's financial desperation violently invaded my physical workspace. I was seated at my glass desk in the middle of a high-stakes video conference with a commercial real estate developer based in Tokyo. My corner office was designed to be a sanctuary of absolute focus. The heavy oak door to my suite was always kept shut during international negotiations, a strict boundary my executive assistant Sarah enforced with military precision. But the sanctity of that boundary was suddenly shattered by the sound of raised voices echoing through the reception area. I could hear Sarah firmly instructing someone that they could not simply barge in unannounced. Her protests were completely ignored. The heavy oak door flew open, hitting the rubber wall stop with a loud, definitive thud. Preston marched into my office with his wife Monica trailing right behind him. They bypassed my assistant, completely moving with the unearned entitlement of people who believed the world existed simply to cater to their demands. I did not flinch or react with surprise. I calmly muted my microphone, looked directly at the camera, and politely asked my Tokyo clients for a brief 5-minute recess to handle an unauthorized building intrusion. I closed my laptop screen and folded my hands on the desk, waiting. Preston was wearing a custom-tailored suit that I knew he could not afford, while Monica carried a designer handbag that cost more than her husband had earned in the entire previous quarter. They stood in front of my desk, radiating aggressive hostility. Preston did not bother with a greeting. He reached inside his leather portfolio, pulled out a thick, stapled document, and violently slid it across the smooth glass surface of my desk. The papers stopped right in front of my folded hands. "Sign it!" Preston demanded, his voice tight, with a mixture of arrogance and poorly concealed panic. I looked down at the bold black letters printed at the top of the first page. It was a quitclaim deed. It was a legally binding document designed to completely surrender any and all rights, interests, and ownership claims to a specific piece of real estate. The property address listed on the document was my parents' house in Connecticut. I did not touch the paper. I simply looked up at my brother, letting the silence stretch until his artificial confidence began to crack. Preston slammed his hands down on the edge of my desk, leaning forward to try and physically intimidate me. "The bank is being completely ridiculous," he spat out, his face flushing with angry color. "They are holding up the funding for my home equity line of credit over a minor paperwork issue from 9 years ago. Apparently, when Mom and Dad refinanced the house back then, they involved you as some sort of minor guarantor or secondary signer on the paperwork. The underwriters are dragging their feet, claiming they need your explicit sign-off to clear the title defect before they will release my $400,000. It is a completely meaningless technicality, but they will not fund my tech startup until you sign that piece of paper releasing your old claim." The absolute delusion of his statement was almost beautiful. He genuinely believed that the bank was just being overly bureaucratic. He had completely misinterpreted the reality of the situation because his massive ego could not comprehend the truth. The bank had run the title search. The bank had discovered that Richard and Patricia were not the legal owners of the property. The bank had seen the name of my holding company, Apex Holdings, on the absolute deed. But Preston, in his infinite arrogance, had twisted that devastating financial reality into a minor clerical error that his little sister just needed to rubber stamp away. Before I could even formulate a response, Monica stepped forward, placing her manicured hand on Preston's shoulder in a show of unified superiority. She looked around my pristine corner office, her eyes sweeping over the original artwork and the panoramic city views with blatant disgust. "It is a cute little space," Fiona Monica said, her voice dripping with venomous condescension. "But it is time to stop playing businesswoman. Preston is actually trying to save this family. He is building a real company that will secure our children's future and generate actual wealth. You have had your fun pretending to be an important executive, but right now your petty little grudges are standing in the way of his business. You need to stop acting like a jealous child, sign the paper, and let my husband do what he was born to do." I slowly picked up the document, feeling the weight of the thick premium paper. They had clearly gone to a lawyer to draft this, assuming I would be stupid enough to sign away a multi-million-dollar asset just because they barged into my office and demanded it. I flipped to the second page, reading the dense legal jargon. They were essentially asking me to gift them the house free and clear, so Preston could immediately leverage it to the hilt and gamble the equity on a logistics app that had zero market viability. He was demanding that I surrender the very roof over my parents' heads so he could play the role of the successful tech mogul. "Are you genuinely telling me," I asked, keeping my tone dangerously calm, "that you want to take out a $400,000 loan against the house where Mom and Dad currently live?" "It is called leveraging assets," Fiona Preston scoffed, rolling his eyes as if he were explaining basic addition to a toddler. "It is what real entrepreneurs do. The startup needs a temporary cash injection to scale operations. The return on investment will be astronomical. I will pay off the equity line in 6 months, and the family portfolio will double. Not that you would understand high-level venture mechanics. Just sign the deed so I can get back to doing real work." "And what happens when your little delivery app burns through that $400,000, just like it burned through your initial investor capital?" I asked, looking directly into his eyes. "What happens when the bank forecloses on the house and Mom and Dad are thrown out onto the street? Who exactly is the patriarch going to blame when that happens?" Monica slammed her hand on the desk, her diamond rings clacking sharply against the glass. "Do not you dare speak to him like that," she shrieked. You are just bitter because you are a miserable spinster, and Preston actually has a family and a legacy to protect. You have absolutely no right to hold his funding hostage over a 9-year-old clerical error. Sign the paper immediately, Fiona. We are not leaving this office until you do your duty. I looked at the document one last time. I looked at the little yellow sticky tab they had placed on the signature line, pointing exactly to where they expected me to surrender my leverage. I stood up from my chair. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer them an explanation about Apex Holdings or the true nature of the foreclosure I had secretly bailed our parents out of a decade ago. I simply walked around my desk holding the quitclaim deed in my right hand. Preston and Monica watched me with smug satisfaction, clearly believing that their aggressive ambush had worked. They thought I was walking over to grab a pen from the credenza. Instead, I walked straight over to the heavy-duty industrial crosscut shredder sitting in the corner of my office. It was a massive machine designed to destroy sensitive corporate financial records, reducing thick documents into microscopic pieces of unreadable confetti. I pressed the power button on the top of the machine. The heavy motor hummed to life with a deep mechanical growl. "What are you doing?" Preston demanded, his smug expression instantly vanishing. I held the quitclaim deed directly over the feeding slot. "I am cleaning up the garbage that someone left on my desk," I replied. I let go of the paper. The industrial blades caught the thick document, instantly pulling it down into the machine with a violent grinding noise. Preston lunged forward across the room, but he was entirely too late. We both watched as the legal document demanding I surrender my multi-million-dollar property was chewed into thousands of tiny, meaningless shreds. The machine ground to a halt, leaving a heavy, stunned silence in the office. Monica gasped, pressing her hands over her mouth in pure shock. Preston's face turned an alarming shade of purple, his eyes bulging with unrestrained fury. "You crazy, vindictive witch!" Preston screamed, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "You have completely lost your mind. Do you have any idea what you just did? You just ruined my funding timeline. I will drag you through the courts for this. I will sue you for breach of contract. I will sue you for financial obstruction." I turned my back on his screaming and calmly walked over to my desk. I pressed the silver button on my intercom system. "Sarah," I said, projecting my voice clearly over Preston's manic threats, "please contact building security and have these two individuals escorted off the premises immediately. If they refuse to leave quietly, instruct security to involve the police." I released the button and looked at my brother and his wife. "You do not have a contract, Preston," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through his rage. "You do not have a case, and you certainly do not have $400,000. Now get out of my office before I have you thrown out in handcuffs." Preston stood there shaking with a toxic mixture of embarrassment and rage as two large uniformed security guards appeared in my office doorway. Monica grabbed his arm, pulling him backward toward the exit, terrified of a public scene. He allowed himself to be dragged away, but he kept his eyes locked on mine, pointing a shaking finger in my direction. "You are going to pay for this, Fiona," he yelled as the guards flanked him. "I am taking this to the family lawyers. I will strip you of everything you have." I stood perfectly still, watching them being escorted down the hallway until the heavy oak door finally swung shut. I walked back to my desk and opened my laptop, rejoining my international video conference. I smiled warmly at the camera. "I apologize for the delay, gentlemen," I said smoothly. "The trash has been taken out. Let us resume our negotiations." I knew exactly what Preston was going to do next. He was going to hire the most aggressive attorney he could find using credit. He did not have to file a lawsuit built on a foundation of absolute lies. He thought he was going to war over a clerical error. He was about to find out that he was bringing a wooden sword to a nuclear battlefield. Exactly 48 hours passed before Preston launched his next pathetic offensive. I spent those 2 days immersed in the rhythm of my actual career, closing a major acquisition in the commercial district and entirely ignoring the phantom digital noise of my blocked family contacts. I knew Preston was scrambling. When you operate entirely on unearned arrogance and borrowed money, hitting a sudden financial roadblock does not provoke introspection. It provokes a desperate, frantic escalation. He was cornered by his own lies, and he was lashing out. It was mid-morning on Thursday when my executive assistant Sarah stepped into my office holding a thick, oversized manila envelope. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the slight tension in her posture. "A private courier just dropped this off, Fiona," she said, handing it across the desk. "It was marked for your direct signature only. I signed for it on your behalf, but the courier was aggressively insistent that it was highly sensitive legal material." I thanked her and waited until she closed the door before inspecting the package. The return address printed in an ostentatious gold foil font read, "Vance and Sterling Associates." I recognized the name immediately, and a cold smile touched my lips. They were not a respected corporate litigation firm. They were a team of bottom-feeding legal bullies, famous for running flashy television commercials late at night, promising massive payouts for personal injury claims and neighborhood disputes. Preston had not hired a legitimate real estate attorney because a legitimate attorney would have pulled the title run a basic public records search and immediately told him he was committing fraud. Instead, Preston had found a sleazy attack dog desperate enough for a retainer to draft a threat without checking the facts. I sliced the envelope open with my silver letter opener and pulled out 3 pages of heavy watermarked paper. The document was titled "Formal Cease and Desist and Notice of Pending Litigation." I leaned back in my chair, smoothing the pages flat on my glass desk, and read the absolute fiction Preston had paid someone to write. "Dear Ms. Wilson," the letter began, "we represent your brother Preston Wilson, acting in his capacity as the designated manager of the Wilson family estate. It has come to our immediate attention that you are actively engaging in malicious financial obstruction regarding our client, lawful pursuit of venture capital funding." I took a slow breath, letting the sheer audacity of the words settle in. The letter went on to accuse me of deliberately withholding my signature from a standard residential quitclaim deed, an act they categorized as a vindictive breach of familial fiduciary duty. Preston attorney painted a picture of a jealous, spiteful sister purposefully holding her brother brilliant technology startup hostage over a meaningless clerical error. The legal jargon was heavy-handed and entirely misapplied. They threatened to hold me personally liable for millions of dollars in projected lost revenue, claiming that my refusal to sign away my supposed minor guarantor rights was directly sabotaging his Series B funding round. The final paragraph was the absolute pinnacle of intimidation. It was a formal ultimatum demanding that I sign the enclosed deed and return it to their office within 48 hours. If I failed to comply, Vance and Sterling Associates promised to file a massive civil lawsuit against me for intentional interference with prospective economic advantage. They even threatened to seek a court order to garnish my corporate wages to cover the damages caused to Preston Imaginary Empire. They were threatening to sue me for refusing to give them my own house. Preston had actually put his extortion attempt in writing on a formal legal letterhead. He had officially documented his attempt to coerce me into signing away a multi-million-dollar asset that belonged to my holding company so he could secure a $400,000 line of credit to fund a delivery app that had zero actual market value. He was trying to bully the bank by bullying me, and he was leaving a beautiful glowing paper trail of his own fraudulent intent. Right as I placed the letter back on the desk, the red message indicator light on my office phone began to blink steadily. It was a notification from my unified communication system, which captured voicemails from blocked numbers and routed them to a secure digital inbox. I clicked the mouse, opening the audio file on my computer. The voice that filled my quiet office did not belong to Preston or his sleazy lawyer. It was my father. Richard's voice boomed through the computer speakers, thick with the furious authoritarian entitlement he had used to control my mother and me for my entire life. He was using his disappointed patriarch tone, the one designed to make me feel small, insignificant, and desperate for his validation. But I was no longer the frightened 20-year-old girl begging for his approval. I was simply a woman listening to a stranger digging his own grave. "Fiona, I am absolutely disgusted with you." Richard spat, the anger vibrating through the digital recording. "I just got off the phone with your brother. He told me about the disgraceful stunt you pulled in your office and the fact that you destroyed legal documents that are crucial to the survival of this family. Who do you think you are? You are acting like a spoiled, jealous child throwing a tantrum because Preston is actually making something of his life while you sit alone in that cold office of yours, hoarding your little pennies. I stared at the city's skyline outside my window, letting his toxic words wash over me without absorbing a single drop. Your brother is trying to build an empire, Richard continued, his voice rising in volume and intensity. He is trying to secure the future of the Wilson name, and he is trying to fix the financial mess you left us in when you selfishly cut off our emergency funds. He is stepping up to lead this family, and you are deliberately sabotaging his business out of pure spite. I will not tolerate this kind of betrayal in my household, Fiona. I will not allow you to tear down your brother just because you are emotionally unequipped to handle his success. There was a brief pause on the recording. I could hear the faint sound of my mother, Patricia, crying dramatically in the background, a manufactured soundtrack of victimhood designed to maximize my supposed guilt. When my father spoke again, his voice was a low, menacing growl. This is your final warning, young lady. You will call Preston attorney today. You will sign that deed and you will apologize to your brother for your atrocious behavior. If you do not stop sabotaging his business immediately, you are permanently finished. Do you hear me? You will be entirely disowned. I will call my estate planners and I will cut you out of the family legacy completely. You will never set foot in this house again, and you will not see a single dime of this estate when your mother and I pass. You will be dead to this family. The recording clicked and went dead. I sat perfectly still, the silence in my office ringing loudly in my ears. I did not feel a rush of tears. I did not feel a sudden, suffocating weight of rejection. I felt an icy, profound, and absolute liberation. He was threatening to cut me out of the family legacy. He was threatening to withhold the estate. The irony was so brilliant, it was almost blinding. The family legacy he was using as a weapon was a mountain of debt that I had quietly erased 9 years ago when he was busy upgrading his golf clubs. The estate he was threatening to disinherit me from was the very ground beneath his feet, ground that I had purchased at a private foreclosure auction through a blind trust while he slept soundly in a bed he no longer owned. They had absolutely nothing left to withhold from me. Their entire reality was a stage play funded by my silent charity, and they had just fired the director. I reached out and clicked the mouse. The digital trash can icon flashed, and my father's furious ultimatum vanished into the digital void, deleted permanently. I looked down at the flashy, aggressive cease and desist letter sitting on my desk. Preston had played his final card. He had sent the legal threat. He had sent the patriarch to enforce the hierarchy. They were fully committed to the lie, fully invested in stealing equity from a house they believed was theirs by divine right. The trap was not just set, it was locked, loaded, and begging to be sprung. I picked up my desk phone and pressed the speed dial button for my lead corporate attorney. The line rang exactly once before he answered. "Gregory speaking. Gregory?" I said, my voice crisp and ringing with total authority. "It is time," Fiona. Gregory replied, his tone instantly shifting into high gear. "Did they make a move?" "Preston just sent a formal cease and desist through a billboard law firm called Vance and Sterling," I explained, tapping my manicured fingernail against the heavy paper. "They are officially demanding I sign a quitclaim deed to facilitate his home equity line of credit. They are threatening to sue me for millions in lost venture capital if I do not surrender my supposed minor guarantor rights by Friday. Furthermore, my father just left a voicemail threatening to permanently disown me from the estate if I do not comply with Preston financial demands." A low, dark chuckle came through the speaker. Gregory had been my attorney for 6 years. He knew exactly how much power I held, and he despised parasitic entitlement almost as much as I did. "They actually put an extortion attempt regarding a property they do not own in writing?" Gregory asked. "They printed it on high-quality watermark paper," I confirmed, smiling at the sheer stupidity of my brother. "They took the bait, Gregory. They swallowed it whole. Preston is aggressively pushing the bank and threatening me to clear the title defect." "Then it is time to unsheathe the weapon," Gregory said, his voice turning sharply professional. "I have the complete Apex Holdings property dossier prepared. The original foreclosure purchase records the chain of title, the current deed, and the notice of immediate eviction are all verified and ready for deployment. How do you want to play this, Fiona? I stood up from my desk, picking up the cease and desist letter. I want you to draft a comprehensive response to Vance and Sterling. Include the certified copy of the absolute deed, proving that Apex Holdings is the sole legal owner of the property. Inform them that their client is attempting to commit federal bank fraud by pledging an asset he does not own. Copy the underwriting department at Preston Bank on the correspondence so they know exactly what kind of criminal they are dealing with. Consider it done, Gregory said. And your parents. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window looking out at the city I had conquered on my own terms. Send the eviction notice to the house, I instructed, my voice devoid of any hesitation or pity. Execute the foreclosure of their reality. Give them the standard 30 days to vacate the premises. They want Preston to be the head of the family. They want him to handle the estate. Let us see how the Golden Boy handles packing their boxes. I hung up the phone and dropped Preston's ridiculous legal threat into the industrial shredder, letting the machine grind it into dust. The time for silent sacrifices was over. The era of the Golden Boy was officially dead. The drive across downtown to Gregory's office took exactly 12 minutes. I spent the entire ride in the back of my town car, watching the city blur past the tinted windows, feeling a profound sense of absolute clarity. For 9 years, I had carried the secret weight of my family financial survival. I had protected my father's fragile ego and shielded my mother from the terrifying reality of suburban poverty. I had allowed them to live in their sprawling Connecticut illusion. Today, the illusion ends. Gregory Corner's suite on the 42nd floor was a masterclass in aggressive minimalism. There were no family photos on his desk, no warm touches to make clients feel comfortable. It was a room designed for corporate warfare. When I walked through the double glass doors, he was already standing by his conference table, a thick, perfectly organized file folder resting on the polished mahogany surface. He did not offer small talk. He simply pointed to the file with a razor-sharp smile. "Let us review the anatomy of a spectacular failure," Gregory said, opening the file. He produced the original documents from almost a decade ago. It is truly remarkable how quickly people forget who holds the keys to their kingdom. I ran my fingers over the aged parchment of the original default notices. I remembered the exact day I intercepted these documents. I was 25 years old, sitting in my damp studio apartment, reviewing public real estate records to find distressed properties for my first solo investments. I had typed my own last name into the county database on a whim. The result had stopped my heart. My parents' sprawling Connecticut estate, the very house where Richard hosted his lavish summer barbecues and Patricia held her exclusive garden club meetings, was exactly 90 days away from public auction. Richard had quietly leveraged the house to the absolute maximum to fund a series of catastrophic golf course investments. When the market shifted, he stopped paying the mortgage entirely, hiding the default notices from everyone, including his wife. He was completely paralyzed by his own financial incompetence. Rather than confronting him and triggering a massive family meltdown, I had chosen a different path. I had just closed my first major commercial deal and had significant liquid capital. I could have simply written my father a check to clear the arrears. But I knew Richard. If I handed him cash, he would have used it to maintain his country club lifestyle while the house slipped right back into foreclosure. He needed a bailout, but he also needed a landlord. So I engaged Gregory. Through my newly formed blind trust, Apex Holdings, we approached the bank holding the distressed debt. The bank was thrilled to offload a toxic, non-performing residential asset. I bought the paper for pennies on the dollar. But I did not stop there. To prevent a public foreclosure auction that would have destroyed my parents' social standing in their affluent community, Gregory executed a deed in lieu of foreclosure. Richard and Patricia legally surrendered the absolute title of the property to Apex Holdings. In exchange, they were allowed to remain in the house. "They are not homeowners," Gregory stated, tapping the certified deed with his expensive pen. "They have not been homeowners for 9 years. They are your legal tenants. They are tenants who have never paid a single dime in rent, I added, my voice echoing in the quiet office. To save my father pride, I had orchestrated a beautiful fiction. I told my parents I would handle the transition with the bank. I set up an automated monthly transfer of $5,200 from my accounts to cover the massive property taxes, the insurance premiums, and the essential structural maintenance required to keep the aging estate from falling apart. I allowed Richard to call it his automated mortgage payment so he could still feel like the master of his domain. I let them live rent-free in a multi-million-dollar home that belonged entirely to me. And they took that silent, enormous sacrifice and credited it entirely to Preston. They allowed my brother to wear the crown of the provider while I quietly paid for the castle. Gregory pulled Preston's cease and desist letter from his briefcase, laying it next to the absolute deed. He shook his head, letting out a dry, humorless laugh. Your brother retained Vance and Sterling. They are a volume shop, Fiona. They handle slip and fall accidents and minor traffic disputes. They churn out threatening letters hoping to intimidate unsophisticated targets into quick cash settlements. The attorney who drafted this clearly did not bother to run a basic title search. If he had, he would have realized he just sent a formal legal demand to the actual owner of the property demanding she sign away her rights to accommodate a fraudulent loan application. Preston thinks he is dealing with a clerical error, I said, leaning forward, resting my elbows on the mahogany table. He thinks the bank just needs my signature to clear a minor hurdle. He genuinely believes that because he is the sole heir named in Richard, he has the right to extract $400,000 in equity from the home to save his failing logistics startup. Monica even told me to stop playing businesswoman and just sign the paper to secure the family future. Gregory's eyes gleamed with predatory delight. He is attempting to secure a home equity line of credit against collateral he does not own. He is submitting financial documents to a federally insured institution, claiming legal right to an asset held by Apex Holdings. If he signs the final closing documents, he crosses the threshold into federal bank fraud. We have him completely dead to rights, Fiona. We can file an injunction. We can sue him for malicious prosecution. We can report the attorney to the state bar for gross negligence. We could absolutely bury them under a mountain of litigation that would bankrupt his startup by Tuesday. I looked down at the documents. The aggressive cease and desist letter lying right next to the certified deed proving my absolute ownership. The traditional corporate response would be to unleash a massive legal counterstrike. It would be to bury Preston in paperwork and force him to publicly admit his fraud. But that would require engaging with his delusion. That would validate his belief that we were fighting a war between equals. Preston wanted a grand legal battle because a grand battle meant he was important. He wanted the drama of a family feud because it fed his victim complex. I did not want a battle. I wanted a slaughter. I wanted a response so painfully mundane and bureaucratic that it would shatter his entire reality in a single stroke. No lawsuits, Gregory, said, my voice perfectly calm and cold. We are not going to validate his arrogant little fantasy with a massive legal response. We are not going to threaten him or engage with Vance and Sterling ridiculous claims. Gregory raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. Then how do you want to handle this? Preston thinks he is the patriarch, I explained, tracing the edge of the deed with my finger. He thinks he just took over the estate finances. He sent a legal demand, trying to act like the master of the house. So let us treat him exactly like what he is. He is managing the affairs of a delinquent tenant. I looked up, meeting Gregory's eyes. Draft a standard tenant ledger, nothing fancy, no corporate letterhead from the law firm, just the basic automated accounting printout from Apex Holdings property management software. Generate a ledger showing that the occupants of the Connecticut property are officially 30 days delinquent on their monthly maintenance and tax responsibilities. Add a standard late fee. Gregory's lips parted in a slow, wicked smile as he instantly grasped the profound insult of the strategy. You want to respond to a multi-million-dollar lawsuit threat with a past due rent notice. Exactly, I said. Do not address the fraud. Do not address his startup. Do not even mention the quitclaim deed or his attempt to leverage the house. Just send a completely automated generic notice stating that the monthly payment of $5,200 has not been received for the current billing cycle. Attach the standard language stating that if the delinquent balance is not cleared within 15 business days, Apex Holdings will initiate formal eviction proceedings. It is the ultimate dismissal, Gregory noted, pulling his laptop toward him and opening the property management interface. It completely ignores his posturing. It reduces his grand legal threat to a minor administrative annoyance. He demanded $20,000 from me to cover his so-called transition costs into taking over the estate, I said, the memory of his arrogant voice echoing in my mind. He told me he was the adult in the room. Let the adult figure out how to explain to his lawyer that he just tried to mortgage a house he does not own, while simultaneously defaulting on his parents' rent. Send the ledger directly to Vance and Sterling. Let his sleazy attorney be the one to realize that their client is not a wealthy heir securing his legacy, but rather a broke fraud whose parents are about to be homeless. Gregory's fingers flew across the keyboard. He generated the document in less than 2 minutes. He printed the ledger and slid it across the table. It was beautifully ordinary. A simple black and white spreadsheet listing the property address, the tenant names, and a bold red balance due of $5,250, reflecting the added $50 late fee. Perfect, I said, staring at the document. It was a masterpiece of corporate apathy. I will have this couriered to Vance and Sterling immediately, Gregory said, placing the ledger into a standard windowed envelope. When that attorney looks up Apex Holdings and pulls the actual title record to verify the landlord claim, he is going to drop Preston as a client faster than you can blink. No personal injury lawyer is going to risk his license participating in federal bank fraud. I stood up from the conference table, smoothing the front of my suit jacket. The trap was perfectly set. Preston had marched into my office demanding I surrender my kingdom, and I had just handed him a bill for the cleaning service. He was about to experience the absolute crushing weight of reality. Let me know when the courier confirms delivery, Gregory, I said, turning toward the door. I have a feeling my brother is going to have a very difficult conversation with his legal counsel this afternoon. I walked out of the high-rise office, stepping into the elevator with a profound sense of peace. The golden boy was finally going to learn exactly who actually held the gold. The delivery of the single-page ledger to the cramped strip mall office of Vance and Sterling Associates occurred precisely at 2 p.m. I knew this because Gregory forwarded me the delivery confirmation signature. What happened next was a display of sheer staggering incompetence that even I had not fully anticipated. When you operate a volume law practice, heavily reliant on flashy billboards and quick settlements, diligence is often the first casualty. Instead of performing a basic title search on the Connecticut property, Preston attorney took one glance at the generic automated invoice from Apex Holdings and assumed it was a childish bluff. He looked at the black and white spreadsheet, the $50 late fee, and the total balance of $5,250 and completely misread the situation. He did not see the quiet power of a massive holding company enforcing a lease. He saw a desperate younger sister creating a fake shell company on her computer to try and scare her older brother. The lawyer, who was likely charging Preston a massive retainer he could not afford, immediately called his client. I could easily imagine the conversation that followed. The sleazy attorney probably laughed out loud, assuring my brother that my response was definitive proof that I had no real legal counsel and absolutely no actual leverage. He likely told Preston that the fake rent invoice was a pathetic intimidation tactic designed to distract from my fiduciary obligations to the estate. Preston, fueled by this spectacularly bad legal advice and his own limitless ego, took that assumption and ran with it straight to our parents. He convinced them that my refusal to sign the quitclaim deed and my subsequent invoice were signs of profound weakness. He spun a narrative where I was terrified, cornered, and lashing out with fabricated documents because I knew they were about to strip me of my inheritance. He painted himself as the victorious protector of the family wealth. My parents, intoxicated by Preston, manufactured victory and blinded by their own unchecked entitlement, decided it was time to deliver the final crushing blow. They wanted to punish me for daring to demand money from the golden boy. They wanted to starve me into submission and remind me of my place at the bottom of the family hierarchy. I could picture the scene perfectly. Richard sitting in his leather wingback chair swirling a glass of expensive scotch that I had technically subsidized while Patricia hovered over his shoulder, egging him on. At exactly 8 o'clock that evening, a notification popped up on my personal laptop. It was an email from my father's personal account. He had copied my mother, Preston, and Monica on the message, ensuring the entire family was present in the digital gallery for my execution. The subject line read, "Official Notice of Disinheritance and Financial Severance." I clicked the email open, leaning back against my velvet sofa, taking a slow sip of sparkling water as I read the words that would ultimately leave them homeless. Fiona, the email began. Your brother has informed us of the ridiculous fake invoice you had couriered to his legal counsel today. We are absolutely appalled by your childish behavior. To invent a fake property management company and demand rent from your own parents is a level of disrespect and delusion that we will not tolerate. We know you are lashing out because you are jealous of Preston Venture Capital's success, but trying to extort us with a fabricated late fee is pathetic. You have made your choices, and now you will live with the consequences. I read the next paragraph twice, savoring the magnificent stupidity of my father's rage. Because of your malicious obstruction of your brother's business and your refusal to sign the deed clearance, we are taking immediate corrective action. Effective today, you are officially cut out of this family. You are no longer our daughter, and you are no longer a beneficiary of the Wilson estate. Furthermore, we are putting an immediate halt to all property tax reimbursements and maintenance contributions we normally allow you to manage on our behalf. We will not be sending the $5,200 this month or any month moving forward. We are withholding all payments to starve out your little rebellion. We will resume funding only when you sign Preston legal documents and issue a formal written apology to this family. Do not contact us again until you are ready to comply. It was a masterpiece of accidental self-destruction. In his desperate attempt to sound like a powerful patriarch, putting his disobedient daughter in her place, Richard had documented his own financial suicide. He had explicitly put in writing that he was intentionally withholding his monthly payment. He had characterized it as a property tax reimbursement to maintain his delusion of ownership, but in the eyes of the law and the state housing court, a monthly payment made to maintain residence is rent. He had just handed me a signed, dated confession of deliberate lease default. I did not feel a single pang of sorrow reading my father's declaration of disinheritance. I did not care that my mother had stood over his shoulder and approved every toxic word. I did not care that Preston and Monica were probably sitting in their overpriced rented apartment, toasting to my supposed demise. All I felt was the cold, clinical satisfaction of a hunter watching the prey lock the cage door from the inside. For 9 years I had carried their massive debt. I had saved them from public ruin when Richard Golf Course investments collapsed. I had bought their distressed debt through Apex Holdings, allowing them to live rent-free in a multi-million-dollar mansion, while I quietly paid the massive property taxes and maintenance fees. And their response to my years of silent sacrifice was to disown me the second they thought I was blocking Preston from stealing my equity. I saved the email as a secure PDF file and forwarded it directly to Gregory's personal inbox. I did not add a long explanation or a triumphant message. I simply typed 3 words in the body of the email. They confessed. Proceed. Gregory called me less than 2 minutes later. I answered the phone and heard the unmistakable sound of him laughing. It was a rich, deep sound that echoed through the secure line. He could not contain his genuine amusement. Fiona, he said, his voice thick with predatory glee. Please tell me your father did not actually consult a lawyer before hitting send on this email. He consulted his ego. Gregory the First replied, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. And his ego told him that withholding money was the ultimate way to establish dominance. He thinks he is punishing me by cutting off the very funds that keep a roof over his head. He is entirely convinced that I am just a frightened girl playing a prank with a fake company name. This is beyond perfect, Gregory said, the amusement fading into sharp professional focus. In Connecticut, housing court, one of the few defenses a tenant can sometimes use to delay an eviction is claiming temporary financial hardship or a banking error. They try to argue that they intended to pay, but fell on tough times requiring leniency from the judge. But your father just incinerated that defense. He explicitly stated in a documented communication that he is willfully, intentionally, and maliciously withholding payment as a punitive measure. He admitted he has the funds, but refuses to pay until you meet an extortionate demand regarding a separate legal matter. He just handed us the absolute fastest path to an expedited eviction. He thinks he is withholding property tax reimbursements, I noted, running my finger along the rim of my glass. He still cannot comprehend that Apex Holdings is his actual landlord, and that he is just a tenant living on my charity. The court will not care what creative terminology he uses to protect his fragile pride, Gregory stated firmly. A recurring monthly payment required to occupy a property is rent, period. He refused to pay rent, and he put his refusal in writing. He has officially breached the terms of his occupancy agreement and surrendered any right to leniency. I walked over to the large bay window in my living room, looking down at the street lamps glowing in the cool night air. The city moved below me, completely unaware of the absolute devastation I was about to unleash on a quiet suburban cul-de-sac. My parents had spent my entire life making me feel small. They had demanded my silent financial support while showering my brother with praise and affection. Now they had formally cut me out of their family to protect a son who was currently trying to leverage their home for a doomed delivery app. Draft the notice, Gregory, I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady pitch. Do not use the automated system this time. Print it on the heavy, firm letterhead. I want it to look as official and terrifying as possible. A formal 30-day notice to pay or quit. Gregory confirmed, typing rapidly on his end of the line. I will have it drafted, stamped, and served by a uniformed process server tomorrow morning. I will make sure the server knocks loudly so the neighbors can see exactly what is happening. When they receive it, I said they are going to panic. They are going to call Vance and Sterling and demand to know why a holding company is trying to evict them. And that is when that sleazy lawyer is finally going to pull the title records. That is when Preston is going to realize he cannot get his loan. And that is when Richard and Patricia are going to realize they do not own a single brick of that house, Gregory finished. The 30-day clock starts the second the process server hands them the paper. If they do not produce the rent, which we know they will not, because Preston has likely already bled them dry, the sheriff will be changing their locks by the end of next month. Execute it, I commanded. Let the countdown begin. It was a spectacular Sunday afternoon in Connecticut, the kind of crisp, clear day that Richard and Patricia believed they were entitled to by divine right. I was sitting on the leather sofa in my downtown penthouse sipping a cup of black tea when my laptop chimed with a secure incoming transmission. Gregory had not just hired a standard municipal process server. He had retained a premium private intelligence firm that utilized discrete body cameras to provide absolute undeniable legal verification of delivery. I clicked the encrypted link and watched the live feed of my parents' suburban illusion being shattered in real time. The camera lens captured the sprawling backyard of the estate in high definition. Richard was holding court exactly as I knew he would be. He stood behind his massive custom-built outdoor kitchen, flipping premium imported steaks with silver tongs. He was wearing a ridiculous monogrammed apron, laughing loudly with a group of men from his country club. Patricia was floating between tables of catered appetizers, holding a crystal flute of champagne, playing the role of the flawless, affluent hostess. The lawn was crowded with their wealthy friends and business associates, all completely oblivious to the fact that they were partying on property that belonged entirely to me. The process server marched straight past the valets and the catering staff. He did not hesitate or wait for an invitation. He walked directly up to the grill, cutting right through Richard's circle of sycophantic friends. Richard Wilson, the server, asked, his voice projecting loudly over the ambient music. Richard paused, his smile faltering as he looked the uniformed man up and down. He puffed out his chest, attempting to project his usual patriarchal dominance. I am Richard Wilson. Who are you, and how did you get past the caterers? The server did not answer the question. He simply thrust a thick, legal envelope directly against Richard's chest. You have been served, he announced clearly. Richard dropped his silver tongs and caught the heavy envelope. The country club friends went completely silent. The ambient chatter in the immediate vicinity died down as people turned to stare. I watched the live feed with icy satisfaction as my father ripped the envelope open. He pulled out the formal 30-day notice to pay or quit. The document was printed on premium legal stock stamped with the official seal of the State Housing Court and backed by the absolute authority of Apex Holdings. I watched his face flush a deep, dangerous shade of crimson as he read the words. For a fraction of a second, I saw genuine raw terror flash across his eyes. He realized he was holding a formal eviction notice, but Richard's entire existence was built on burying uncomfortable truths under layers of aggressive arrogance. He could not afford to look weak in front of his golf buddies. He threw his head back and let out a booming theatrical laugh. He waved the eviction notice in the air like a comedy prop. Can you believe this absolute nonsense? Richard announced to his friends, shaking his head with a manufactured look of fatherly pity. This is what happens when you raise a dramatic daughter. My youngest Fiona is going through a bit of a mental health crisis. She actually printed out a fake eviction notice from a made-up company just to throw a tantrum because we are focusing our investments on her brother tech startup. It is truly sad. His friends chuckled uncomfortably, murmuring their sympathies about the difficulties of dealing with unstable children. Patricia hurried over, placing a manicured hand on his arm, completely agreeing with the lie. The server turned and walked away, the camera feed cutting to black as he exited the property. Richard had laughed it off in public, but the private panic set in immediately. Less than 10 minutes after the server left the property, my phone screen lit up. I had left the family group chat unmuted purely for reconnaissance purposes. The notifications began flooding in one after another, a rapid-fire display of gaslighting and projection. Preston was the first to strike. Preston, Fiona, you have completely lost your mind. Forging court documents to try and scare mom and dad. This is a new low even for you. Preston, we all know you are desperately jealous of my company and my funding round, but trying to play landlord with a fake business name is literally insane. I showed my lawyer your little invoice and he laughed. You have zero power here. Patricia, your brother is right, Fiona. We are deeply concerned about your mental state. Sending a man to disrupt our Sunday gathering is psychotic behavior. We will be looking into psychiatric facilities for you. You clearly need professional help to deal with your extreme jealousy. Richard, you will not extort this family. We are cutting you off completely. Do not expect another dime of our property tax money. You are officially dead to us until you get help and sign Preston documents. I read their messages while sipping my tea completely undisturbed. Their reaction was so perfectly aligned with their historical playbook. Whenever I demonstrated independence or demanded respect, they immediately labeled me crazy or unstable. It was their ultimate defense mechanism. If I was mentally unwell, they did not have to take accountability for their own failures. They were laying the groundwork to explain away my actions to their friends, framing my legal ownership of their home as a psychotic delusion. I did not reply to the group chat. I simply took a screenshot of Richard's message, where he explicitly reiterated his refusal to pay the property maintenance funds and forwarded it to Gregory to add to the eviction file. Let them call me crazy. The sheriff who would arrive in 30 days to change their locks would not be interested in their psychological evaluations. I closed my laptop and enjoyed the rest of my Sunday evening entirely in peace. The reality of their situation took exactly 12 hours to penetrate the thick walls of their delusion. The weekend bravado vanished the moment the financial markets opened on Monday morning. I stepped out of the luxury high-rise building where I lived, walking a block down the avenue to my favorite artisan coffee shop. I was wearing a tailored charcoal suit and carrying my leather briefcase, preparing for a morning of aggressive corporate acquisitions. As I exited the cafe holding my espresso, I saw her. Monica was pacing frantically next to my waiting town car. The woman who had stood in my office just days prior, dripping with venomous condescension and demanding I surrender my home, was completely unrecognizable. The smug superiority was entirely gone. Her designer trench coat was wrinkled, her hair was pulled back in a messy knot. She was gripping a paper coffee cup so tightly, her knuckles were white. When she saw me approaching, she lunged forward, practically throwing herself in my path. "Fiona!" she gasped, her voice cracking with raw, undisguised panic. "Fiona, please, you have to listen to me. I need 5 minutes. Please." I stopped on the pavement, taking a calm sip of my espresso. I looked her up and down, letting the silence stretch until she began to tremble. "You are blocking my car, Monica," I said, my tone perfectly flat. "I have a real business to run. Move." She did not move. Instead, she reached out and grabbed my forearm. Her hands were shaking violently. "You do not understand what you are doing," Monica pleaded, the words spilling out of her mouth in a desperate rush. Preston lawyer finally pulled the county records this morning. He saw the Apex Holdings deed. He saw the chain of title. He called Preston at 6 in the morning, screaming at him. He dropped us, Fiona. The lawyer completely dropped us and said we were trying to involve him in federal bank fraud. I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm. "I am failing to see how your husband's legal incompetence is my problem, Monica. I sent you a bill. You refused to pay it. The eviction proceeds." "It is not just the bank, HELOC," she blurted out, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper as she looked around the busy sidewalk. "Preston lied to your parents. He lied to everyone. The bank loan was never going to be enough to fund the startup. He already went to private angel investors, Fiona, aggressive private equity guys. He signed term sheets with them last month." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the sheer magnitude of my brother's stupidity. "He used his guaranteed future inheritance as collateral." Monica confessed, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes and ruining her expensive makeup. "He signed legal documents pledging the equity in your parents' estate to secure $3 million in private funding. He told them the house was owned free and clear by the family trust and that he was the sole manager. He took an advance on the funding. He already spent it, Fiona. He spent all the advance capital on office spaces and marketing parties." I stared at her, letting the devastating reality of her confession sink in. Preston had not just lied to a retail bank. He had defrauded private equity investors. He had taken millions in aggressive, unregulated capital by pledging a multi-million-dollar asset that belonged to me. "If those investors find out about the eviction notice," Monica sobbed, wrapping her arms around her stomach. "If they see a legal cloud over the property or realize your parents do not own the house, they will pull the funding immediately. They will demand their advance back. We do not have it, Fiona. We have absolutely nothing. The investors will sue us for fraud. They will destroy Preston. He could go to prison. We will lose everything. Our kids will be ruined." She stepped closer, bringing her tear-stained face inches from mine. She was no longer demanding. She was begging for her life. "You have to retract the eviction," Monica whispered, her voice breaking into a pathetic whine. "You have to sign the quitclaim deed and transfer the house back to your parents. If you do not give us the house, Preston will go to jail. Please, Fiona, you have plenty of money. You do not need that house. You have to save your brother." I looked at her desperate, terrified face. I remembered how she had stood in my sanctuary calling me a miserable spinster. I remembered how she had commanded me to do my duty and surrender my leverage to fund her luxurious lifestyle. I felt a slow, cold smile spread across my face. I took a final sip of my espresso and tossed the empty cup into a nearby recycling bin. "You are deeply confused about the nature of our relationship, Monica," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, lethal whisper. "I am not your savior. I am your landlord, and your rent is past due." I signaled to my driver, who immediately opened the rear door of the town car. "Tell Preston to start looking for a very good criminal defense attorney," I said, stepping into the pristine leather interior of the vehicle. "And tell my parents to start packing. 30 days goes by much faster than you think." I pulled the door shut, leaving Monica standing alone on the cold pavement, weeping openly as the car pulled smoothly into the morning traffic. The eviction was no longer just a warning, it was a countdown to their absolute destruction. Before I even reached my office, I opened my laptop and sent a brief, secure message to Gregory. Initiate full hostile exposure. Notify the angel investors of the pending eviction. Burn his empire to the ground. Ensure there is nothing left but ash. The plush leather seat of the town car absorbed the subtle vibrations of the city street as I watched the delivery confirmation checkmark appear next to my message to Gregory. I closed my laptop and rested my hands on my briefcase, letting the profound gravity of Monica's panicked confession wash over me. The morning sunlight filtering through the tinted windows felt completely detached from the absolute legal nightmare my brother had just constructed for himself. Until that moment, I had assumed Preston was simply a narcissist playing out of his depth. I thought he was trying to secure a standard regional bank loan using our parents' supposed equity to float his sinking logistics application. That would have been standard mortgage fraud, an arrogant and stupid maneuver, but one easily halted by a simple title check. But the reality was infinitely darker and vastly more dangerous. Preston had gone to private equity. He had engaged angel investors. Those were not local loan officers checking credit scores. They were aggressive, ruthless financial predators who demanded absolute perfection in their collateral. To secure millions of dollars in an advance funding round, Preston would have been forced to sign binding representations and warranties. He would have executed legal pledges explicitly swearing under penalty of perjury that the Connecticut estate was fully owned by the Wilson Family Trust and free of all encumbrances. He had used interstate communications to transmit those fraudulent claims. He had wired stolen money across state lines. The magnitude of his greed was breathtaking. Preston had not just committed a minor financial faux pas. He had committed federal wire fraud. He had committed securities fraud. He had actively defrauded institutional investors out of millions of dollars to fund marketing parties and lease premium office space for a company that generated zero revenue. He was staring down the barrel of a federal indictment, and he had genuinely believed that bullying his sister into signing a piece of paper would magically retroactively cure his massive criminal exposure. My phone vibrated sharply against the leather seat next to me. The caller ID displayed an unknown local number. I knew exactly who it was. I tapped the screen and brought the phone to my ear, remaining entirely silent. "You think you can just drive away from me, Fiona?" Monica hissed, her voice vibrating with a raw, vicious energy that completely erased the weeping, desperate woman from the coffee shop pavement. She had borrowed a phone or bought a burner specifically to bypass my block. Her tone was no longer pleading. It was dripping with venomous malice. "I warned you to stay away from my business, Monica," I said, my voice perfectly steady and devoid of any emotion. "You are going to drop this eviction immediately," she demanded, her breath hitching with rage. "You are going to call your attack dog lawyer, and you are going to pull that notice today. If you do not, I am going to destroy you. I will burn your pristine little corporate reputation to the ground." I looked out the window at the towering glass facades of the financial district. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" "I will go to the press," Monica spat. "I will go on every social media platform and tag your clients, your board of directors, and your investors. I will tell the entire world that you are a psychopathic corporate raider who stole her elderly parents' home out from under them. I will file formal police reports for elder abuse. I will tell the authorities that you manipulated Richard and Patricia when they were vulnerable and swindled them out of their family legacy. I will drag your name through the mud until your firm fires you, and you are left with absolutely nothing. You will be a pariah." Her threat hung in the air, desperate and flailing. She was a cornered animal, realizing the trap was fully closed, and she was lashing out with the only weapon she had left: public shame. But she had fundamentally misunderstood the landscape. I did not operate in a world where neighborhood gossip or Facebook rants carried any currency. I operated in a world of absolute verifiable legal fact. "Monica," I said, keeping my pitch low and unhurried, You are married to a man who just committed multi-million-dollar federal wire fraud. The private equity firm he defrauded will not care about your social media posts. The Securities and Exchange Commission will not care about your fabricated claims of elder abuse. When the federal investigators audit Preston bank accounts and trace the stolen investor funds that he used to pay for your designer clothes and your luxury car leases, they are going to freeze every single asset you possess. She let out a sharp, trembling breath, but I did not give her a second to speak. If you publicly defame my company, I continued, I will not just sue you for libel. I will personally ensure that my legal team joins the inevitable federal bankruptcy proceedings against your husband to strip you of whatever pennies the government leaves behind. You wanted to play the role of the wealthy tech mogul wife. Now you get to play the role of the indicted felon accomplice. Do not ever call this number again. I disconnected the call and permanently blocked the number. The silence in the car returned absolute and comforting. Monica threats were the death rattles of their manufactured dynasty. They were completely out of options and they knew it. The next few days passed with the quiet precision of a ticking clock. The 30-day eviction notice was officially active. The countdown had begun, and I remained entirely focused on my own life, allowing Gregory to handle the systematic dismantling of Preston Investor facade. Gregory had anonymously forwarded the True Apex Holdings deed and the pending eviction notice directly to the lead partners of the private equity firm backing Preston's startup. The resulting explosion was entirely predictable. We received unconfirmed reports through Gregory Network that Preston office had been locked down by the investor's legal team and that a forensic audit had been instantly initiated. Despite their world collapsing around them, my parents maintained a level of denial that bordered on pathological. I knew they were panicking in private, but their public mask remained cemented in place. They were determined to project ultimate victory right up until the moment the sheriff kicked down their custom oak front door. It was exactly 1 week after the process server had disrupted their Sunday barbecue. I was sitting at my desk reviewing the final contracts for a commercial high-rise acquisition when Sarah walked into my office. She carried the afternoon mail sorted into neat stacks. Resting perfectly on top of the corporate correspondence was a thick, heavy envelope made of premium cream-colored cardstock. It was addressed to me in elaborate gold calligraphy. Sarah raised an eyebrow as she handed it to me. "This looks a bit dramatic for our usual mail," she noted. I thanked her and waited for her to leave before sliding my letter opener through the thick paper. I pulled out a rigid, oversized invitation bordered in embossed gold leaf. The sheer extravagance of the stationery was staggering. The text announced that Richard and Patricia Wilson cordially invited me to attend their spectacular Ruby Anniversary Gala, celebrating 40 years of marriage and family legacy. The event was scheduled to take place at the Connecticut estate on the final Saturday of the month. The dress code was strictly black tie. I read the details with a growing sense of absolute astonishment. They were hiring a full orchestra. They were importing a celebrity chef for a 6-course seated dinner. They had secured valet parking and premium floral installations. But the most revealing detail was printed at the very bottom of the card in an elegant italic font. Please join us for a special champagne toast at midnight as Richard and Patricia formally announce the transition of the Wilson family estate and pass the torch of leadership to our son Preston Wilson. I set the invitation down on the glass desk, staring at the gold letters. The timeline was almost poetic. The gala was scheduled exactly 3 days before the eviction notice expired. The puzzle pieces snapped together with brilliant, horrifying clarity. My parents were completely broke. Preston Delivery Startup was a hollow shell. They had absolutely no liquid capital to fund a black tie gala for 200 wealthy guests. The money paying for the orchestra, the imported caviar, and the premium champagne was coming directly from the advance capital Preston had stolen from his private equity investors. He was burning the last remaining drops of his fraudulent funding to throw a massive party celebrating his imaginary inheritance of a house he was about to be legally thrown out of. It was the ultimate manifestation of their shared delusion. They believed that if they threw a party lavish enough, if they gathered enough wealthy friends to witness the passing of the torch, They could somehow magically override the legal reality of my ownership. They thought they could shame me into compliance by publicly declaring Preston the master of the estate in front of the entire community. They were planning to stand in my house drinking champagne bought with stolen money and declare themselves victorious. I picked up the heavy cream-colored card, feeling the expensive texture beneath my fingertips. Monica had threatened to ruin my reputation, but Richard and Patricia had just handed me the perfect venue to execute my final response. They wanted an audience. They wanted a grand public spectacle to cement their status and humiliate the disobedient daughter who dared to demand rent. They had meticulously planned a coronation for the golden boy. They were going to raise their glasses surrounded by their affluent peers and officially hand Preston an empire made entirely of dust. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a sleek black fountain pen. I checked the small RSVP card included in the envelope. There was a box for attending and a box for declining. I placed a sharp, thick checkmark in the box confirming my attendance. I would not miss this party for the world. I was going to put on my finest evening gown. I was going to walk through the front doors of my own property, and I was going to watch their entire fraudulent reality burn to the ground under the light of their own crystal chandeliers. The patriarch wanted a family transition. I was fully prepared to give him one. The tires of my black town car crunched against the pristine white gravel of the circular driveway, marking my arrival at the estate. I sat in the back seat for a moment, simply taking in the sheer audacity of the spectacle before me. The sprawling Connecticut mansion was illuminated by dozens of massive theatrical spotlights, casting a golden glow across the manicured lawns. A fleet of valets in crisp white jackets darted between rows of imported luxury vehicles. I could hear the elegant sweeping notes of a live string quartet drifting from the rear terrace, mingling with the polite laughter of 200 affluent guests. It was a breathtaking display of wealth and permanence. It was also an absolute fraud funded entirely by stolen capital and built on the foundation of my silent charity. My driver opened the door and I stepped out into the cool evening air. I had selected my wardrobe for the evening with the precise clinical calculation of a general preparing for a final siege. I wore a floor-length emerald green Tom Ford gown constructed from heavy silk that draped over my frame like liquid armor. The color was a deliberate choice. It was the color of money, the color of envy, and the color of absolute control. I paired the gown with a diamond collar necklace that Preston entire delivery startup could not have afforded on its best day. I did not look like a bitter, discarded daughter. I looked like the person who owned the very ground they were standing on. I handed my coat to a bewildered attendant at the grand double doors and glided into the main foyer. The interior of the house had been transformed into a floral wonderland. Thousands of white orchids and imported roses cascaded down the sweeping mahogany staircase and spilled over the marble fireplace mantels. Waiters carrying silver trays loaded with beluga caviar and vintage champagne moved seamlessly through the crowd of men in tailored tuxedos and women in sparkling evening gowns. I took a flute of champagne from a passing tray and stepped fully into the light of the massive crystal chandelier overhead. The reaction to my presence was instantaneous and electric. The ambient hum of conversation in the foyer dropped by a noticeable octave. Heads turned, eyes darted. Whispers ignited and spread through the room like wildfire across dry brush. I saw my Aunt Margaret lean into my cousin David, her hand covering her mouth as she stared at me with wide, shocked eyes. I saw business associates of my father exchanging uncomfortable glances. They all knew the narrative. Richard and Patricia had spent the entire week calling every branch of the family tree, ensuring everyone knew that Fiona had suffered a mental break, that she was wildly jealous of Preston, and that she had been officially cut out of the family. I was supposed to be hiding in my city apartment, weeping over my disinheritance. I was not supposed to be standing in the center of their gala, radiating untouchable power. I ignored their stares completely. I moved through the crowded room with slow, deliberate steps, projecting an aura of total invulnerability. Let them whisper. Let them point. Their opinions were as hollow as the bank accounts funding the caviar they were eating. I scanned the room, locating the key players in Tonight Tragedy. I spotted Monica standing near the grand piano. She was wearing a heavily beaded gown that looked expensive, but her face was a mask of sheer terror. The moment her eyes met mine, all the color drained from her cheeks. She looked away instantly, raising her champagne glass to her mouth with trembling hands. She knew exactly what was coming. She knew the eviction clock was ticking, and she knew the ground beneath her designer heels was ready to collapse. Then I saw Preston. He was standing near the French doors leading to the terrace, holding court with a group of 4 men in sharp dark suits. These men did not possess the relaxed, jovial posture of country club friends. Their shoulders were tense. Their eyes were calculating and predatory. They held their drinks rigidly, listening to my brother speak with expressions of guarded skepticism. These were the angel investors. These were the men Preston had defrauded. Gregory had sent them the true Apex Holdings deed and the active eviction notice days ago. I knew they were only attending this party to look my brother in the eye and see if he had the nerve to maintain his lie. They were circling the wounded prey, waiting for the exact moment to strike. Preston, completely oblivious to his impending doom, grinned broadly and clapped one of the men on the shoulder. Patricia emerged from the dining room, playing the role of the flawless, affluent matriarch. She was laughing brightly with a local politician, but her laughter died the second she spotted me standing by the marble fireplace. She froze entirely, her manicured hand gripping the politician's arm. I raised my champagne flute to her in a silent, mocking toast. She spun around and practically sprinted through the crowd, desperately searching for Richard. I did not have to wait long for the patriarch to make his move. He was not going to have security throw me out. That would cause a scene and ruin the elegant atmosphere he had purchased with his son's stolen money. Richard Wilson never handled conflicts quietly when he could use them to inflate his own ego. He wanted to destroy me from a pedestal. He wanted the audience. A sharp ringing sound cut through the elegant music. Richard stood halfway up the grand mahogany staircase, tapping a silver spoon against his crystal glass. The string quartet immediately stopped playing. The 200 guests quieted down, turning their attention to the towering figure on the stairs. Richard looked magnificent in his bespoke tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled, projecting the ultimate image of the successful American patriarch. Patricia hurried to his side, linking her arm through his and smiling bravely at the crowd. Preston positioned himself at the bottom of the stairs, puffing out his chest and attempting to look regal. "Thank you," Richard boomed, his deep voice echoing effortlessly through the massive foyer. "Thank you all for joining Patricia and me on this incredibly special evening. 40 years ago, I married the love of my life. Together, we built a family, we built a successful enterprise, and we built this beautiful home that has hosted so many of your wonderful faces over the decades." The crowd offered a polite, warm murmur of applause. Richard smiled, soaking in the adoration. "But a true legacy is not just about what you build," he continued, placing a hand over his heart. "It is about what you leave behind. It is about knowing that the empire you constructed will be guided by strong, capable hands. It is about passing the torch to the next generation and watching them elevate the family name to heights you never even imagined." He looked down at his son, beaming with manufactured pride. "Preston," he said, his voice swelling with theatrical emotion, "you have proven yourself to be a man of extraordinary vision. Your new logistics venture is going to revolutionize the industry. You have secured incredible backing from brilliant investors who are standing in this very room tonight. You have shown the drive, the intellect, and the relentless ambition that embodies the Wilson name. You are my worthy successor. You are the future of this family." Preston smiled widely, turning to nod at the 4 men in dark suits. The investors did not smile back. They simply stared at him, their expressions completely unreadable. Richard paused, letting the silence stretch for a theatrical moment before turning his gaze directly toward me. The entire room followed his eyes. 200 wealthy guests turned to look at the daughter standing alone by the fireplace in the emerald gown. The air in the room grew instantly heavy with uncomfortable tension. "We raise our children with the best of intentions," Richard said, his voice dropping into a tone of deep paternal sorrow. We give them every advantage. We give them our love. But sometimes the harsh realities of the corporate world can poison a person's spirit. Sometimes children lose their way in bitterness and jealousy. They become blinded by resentment when they see others achieving the greatness they themselves lack. He looked at me with an expression of profound, condescending pity. To those who choose to isolate themselves in anger, we offer only our prayers. We pray that they will eventually conquer their demons. We pray that they will realize the absolute futility of their petty rebellions, and that one day they will find the humility to return to the fold and learn the true value of family loyalty. But until that day, we must protect our legacy. We must move forward with those who are truly worthy. It was a masterclass in public humiliation. He had weaponized his anniversary gala to brand me as a bitter, unstable failure in front of everyone who mattered in his social circle. He was stripping away my dignity while wearing the mask of a grieving father. He wanted me to break. He wanted me to flush with embarrassment, drop my gaze, and flee from the house in tears. I did not move a single muscle. I stood perfectly straight, holding my champagne flute, meeting his condescending stare with eyes as cold and hard as glacial ice. I let him bask in his manufactured superiority. I let him dig the grave as deep as he possibly could. Richard turned his attention back to Preston, his voice rising again to a triumphant crescendo. And so, to secure the future of the Wilson Empire, and to provide our son with the absolute unshakable foundation he needs for his new venture, Patricia and I are doing something unprecedented tonight. We want to show Preston investors and everyone in this room that this family stands behind its own with everything we possess. Richard gestured grandly to the space around him. Tonight we are officially transferring the title of this estate. We are signing this ancestral home over to Preston right here, right now. He will be the absolute master of this house. Preston. Come up here, son. Bring the ceremonial deed forward. Let us sign your future into reality. Preston stepped onto the first stair, pulling a thick leather folio from inside his tuxedo jacket. The crowd broke into enthusiastic applause, completely unaware that they were cheering for a man who was walking up the stairs to execute a fraudulent transfer of a property he was being actively evicted from. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne, watching the golden boy ascend the steps. The trap was sprung. The audience was captive. The execution was about to begin. Preston placed his polished Italian loafer on the first mahogany step. He was grinning like a conquering king returning from a glorious campaign. He reached inside his tailored tuxedo jacket and withdrew a thick leather folio, undoubtedly containing some fabricated ceremonial document he and my father had drafted to appease the sharks circling in the front row. The string quartet began to play a swelling, triumphant chord to accompany his ascent. The 200 affluent guests broke into polite, synchronized applause. I did not run. I glided. My emerald silk gown caught the bright ambient light of the chandelier as I moved, intercepting Preston before his foot could touch the third step. I did not even look at him. I simply reached out and plucked the microphone directly from my father, suddenly slack hand. Richard was so completely stunned by my physical proximity that his fingers uncurled without resistance. He opened his mouth to speak, but his brain could not process the sudden absolute deviation from his scripted reality. I turned my back to my family and faced the sea of elite Connecticut society. I tapped the microphone once. The sharp electronic pop echoed like a gunshot through the massive foyer. The string quartet faltered and ground to a chaotic halt. The polite applause died instantly. The clinking of crystal champagne flutes ceased as 200 pairs of eyes locked onto me. The silence that descended upon the room was absolute and suffocating. I looked down at the front row. The four men in dark suits, Preston Angel investors, stared back at me with expressions of guarded irritation. I nodded slightly toward the side hallway. Gregory, my attorney, stepped smoothly out of the shadows. He was wearing an immaculate black suit, moving with the silent efficiency of an executioner. He walked directly along the front row, handing a heavy black certified legal folder to each of the four investors. They took the folders hesitantly, their irritation morphing into sharp, calculating suspicion. I reached into my evening clutch and pulled out a small black remote. 20 minutes prior to Richard Grand's speech, I had paid a visit to the audiovisual control board tucked away in the library. $1,000 cash tip and a preloaded flash drive had secured my absolute control over the venue displays. I pressed the single button on the remote. The massive digital screen positioned directly behind my father on the landing, previously displaying a looping slideshow of his 40-year marriage snapped to a harsh, blinding white. The sudden burst of light caused several guests to shield their eyes. When their vision cleared, they were no longer looking at photographs of Patricia smiling in a wedding dress. They were looking at a high-resolution scan of a legal document. The state seal of Connecticut was visible in the top corner. The red ink of the county clerk's certification was glaringly obvious. "Good evening," my voice echoed through the grand foyer, perfectly calibrated, icy, and entirely unwavering. My father speaks beautifully about legacy. He speaks of foundations and empires and passing the torch. But a true legacy requires actual ownership. I gestured gracefully to the towering screen behind me. 9 years ago, Richard Wilson Golf Course Investments suffered a catastrophic collapse, I announced, ensuring my diction was razor sharp. He defaulted entirely on the mortgage of this very estate. He hid the default notices from his wife, his friends, and his community, out of sheer unadulterated pride. Exactly 90 days before this property was scheduled to be sold at a public foreclosure auction on the courthouse steps, a private holding company intervened. That company bought the distressed debt for pennies on the dollar and executed a deed in lieu of foreclosure to save this family from public social ruin. I turned my head slowly, looking directly at Richard. He was pale, a sickly shade of gray spreading across his face. His mouth was opening and closing, but no sound emerged. He looked like a man watching an avalanche descend upon his house. "That company is Apex Holdings, LLC. I stated, my voice ringing with total, absolute authority. "I am the sole owner and managing director of Apex Holdings. For 9 years, my parents have not owned a single brick, shingle, or blade of grass on this property. They are my tenants. I have quietly paid the massive property taxes, the exorbitant insurance premiums, and the structural maintenance required to preserve their grand social illusion. I allowed them to pretend they were the masters of this domain, to protect their fragile egos." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. It was a visceral physical reaction. I saw women covering their mouths. I saw men adjusting their ties, looking nervously at the floor. The bedrock of their social hierarchy was being pulverized right in front of them. But illusions are exceptionally expensive. I continued, turning my attention back to the guests. And unfortunately, my tenants have grown ungrateful. They are currently 30 days delinquent on their monthly rent payment. This lavish party, the imported caviar you are eating, and the vintage champagne you are drinking is being hosted in a house they are actively being evicted from. Patricia finally broke through her paralysis. She lunged forward, her manicured hands grasping at the empty air. "Fiona! Stop this right now!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure, unhinged hysteria. "You are ruining everything. You are destroying us." I did not raise my voice, but the microphone amplified my absolute disdain over her frantic cries. "I am not ruining anything, Mother," I said coldly. "I am simply turning on the lights." I pivoted on the stairs, locking my eyes onto Preston. He was frozen on the first step, clutching his useless leather folio to his chest like a child holding a blanket. Sweat was beading on his forehead, shining under the glare of the chandelier. The golden boy was finally facing the blinding heat of reality. I turned my gaze back to the front row. The 4 men in the dark suits had opened their black folders. They were not looking at me anymore. They were staring intensely at the documents Gregory had provided. They were reading the certified, stamped, and verified absolute title deed proving my ownership. They were reading the active 30-day notice to pay or quit that had been served to Richard. "Gentlemen," I said, addressing the investors directly, "my brother Preston has spent the last month playing the role of a brilliant tech visionary. He told you he was the sole manager of a wealthy family trust. He told you this estate was owned free and clear by his parents, and that his inheritance was guaranteed. The lead investor, A tall man with a severe jawline and silver hair at his temples slowly looked up from the folder. His eyes were dead and flat, the kind of eyes that dismantled companies and ruined lives for a living. He used a fabricated claim of future inheritance to secure millions of dollars in your advance private equity funding. I declared the words echoing like hammer strikes. He pledged an asset he does not own, and that his parents have not owned for nearly a decade. He leveraged my property to fund his imaginary empire. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. The guests were completely paralyzed, trapped in the gravitational pull of a spectacular financial catastrophe. Monica, who had been standing near the grand piano, let out a loud, ragged sob and covered her face with her hands, sliding down the wall until she hit the marble floor. Preston dropped his leather folio. It hit the stairs with a dull thud, spilling blank sheets of paper onto the steps. He looked desperately at the investors, raising his hands in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Guys," Preston stammered, his voice squeaking. "Gentlemen, please. This is just a family dispute. My sister is crazy. She is trying to extort me. I can explain everything. The collateral is good. I promise the collateral is good." The lead investor did not blink. He did not yell. He did not throw the folder or make a theatrical scene. He simply closed the black cover with a quiet, definitive snap. He looked at Preston with an expression of cold, absolute rage. He stood up, smoothing the front of his jacket with frightening precision. He reached into his tailored breast pocket and pulled out his cell phone. He held it up, ensuring Preston could see exactly what he was doing. "I do not care about your family drama." "Preston," the investor said, his voice cutting through the silent room with lethal clarity. "I do not care about your sister or your parents or your rent. But you used an interstate wire transfer to accept $3 million of our capital based on forged collateral representations. You submitted fraudulent financial disclosures to institutional investors." The investor punched 3 numbers into his screen, holding his thumb over the call button. "That is federal wire fraud." The investor stated, his voice ringing with the finality of a judge passing sentence. "You are a thief. I am calling the federal authorities right now. Do not even think about moving toward that door." The lead investor did not hesitate. He kept his thumb firmly pressed against the screen of his phone, dialing the direct line to the regional white-collar crime division. The grand foyer of the Connecticut estate, previously buzzing with the polite chatter of 200 affluent guests, transformed into a vacuum of absolute silence. The string quartet had packed their instruments and slipped out the side doors the moment I displayed the title deed on the massive audiovisual screen. The wealthy socialites, the country club golf buddies, and the local politicians stood frozen like statues, their champagne flutes suspended in midair. No one dared to move. No one wanted to be associated with the catastrophic financial detonation occurring at the bottom of the mahogany staircase. We waited in that suffocating quiet for exactly 22 minutes. The distant, high-pitched wail of sirens finally broke the tension, growing louder and more frantic as they tore through the crisp suburban night. Vivid flashes of blue and red light pierced through the grand floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the white orchid arrangements in harsh, unforgiving colors. The heavy double doors swung open with a violent crash. 4 local police officers and 2 federal agents strode into the floral wonderland. They did not care about the black tie dress code or the imported caviar. The lead agent scanned the room and demanded Preston Wilson step forward. Preston tried to back away, his tailored tuxedo suddenly looking 2 sizes too big for his shrinking frame. He stammered a pathetic excuse, his legs giving out as an officer grabbed his shoulder. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoing across the marble floor was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. The golden child, the supposed heir to the Wilson empire, was marched out the front doors in disgrace. He was paraded directly past his wealthy audience, past the valet stand, and shoved into the back of a squad car. Richard and Patricia watched the red taillights disappear down the gravel driveway, their 40-year legacy completely pulverized in front of the very people they had tried to impress. 7 days later, the legal clock expired. I did not attend the eviction in person because I had a company to run, but Gregory ensured the operation was executed with maximum efficiency. He arrived at the estate at 8 in the morning, accompanied by 3 sheriff deputies. Richard and Patricia had stubbornly refused to pack a single box, clinging to the pathetic delusion that their social standing would somehow shield them from the law. They were wrong. The deputies gave them exactly 10 minutes to gather their immediate personal belongings. Gregory stood on the pristine front lawn, watching as my parents were physically escorted out of the house they had fraudulently claimed to own. By 9 o'clock, the locks were changed, and a heavy iron chain was secured across the front gates. Monica had already filed for emergency divorce proceedings, taking her children and fleeing to her sister's cramped apartment, desperate to distance herself from a man facing a decade in federal prison. My parents were left standing on the pavement with 3 suitcases, effectively homeless. They lasted less than 48 hours before they came crawling to me. I was reviewing a quarterly earnings report when the receptionist at Apex Holdings buzzed my office line. She sounded deeply uncomfortable, stating that a frantic older couple was causing a scene in the lobby and demanding to see me. I instructed her to send them back. The heavy glass doors of my executive suite swung open and Richard and Patricia stumbled inside. The transformation was truly staggering. The arrogant patriarch and the flawless judgmental hostess were entirely gone. They looked aged, small, and utterly broken by reality. Patricia was weeping openly, her expensive mascara running down her cheeks, ruining her silk blouse. Richard wrung his hands, his posture hunched, completely stripped of his commanding country club bravado. They collapsed into the chairs opposite my glass desk. "Fiona, please." My father croaked, his voice cracking with desperation. "You have made your point. You won. The investors took everything. Preston is being held without bail. We have nowhere to go. We have absolutely nothing left." My mother reached across the desk, her fingers grasping at the empty air. "We are your family, Fiona. You cannot just leave us on the street. We know you own apartment buildings in the city. Just let us move into one of your units. We will be quiet. We will stay out of your way. You have to help us." I looked at the 2 people who had spent my entire life making me feel completely invisible. I remembered every slight, every cruel comparison, every demand that I sacrifice my hard-earned capital to fund their suburban illusion. I remembered how eagerly they had disowned me just a week prior, when they thought they held the winning hand. I leaned back in my leather chair, my expression completely devoid of sympathy. "I am just a single woman with too much money," I said, maintaining a dangerously calm, flat tone as I threw my mother exact historical insults directly back into her face. "I do not have space for you." I pressed the security button under my desk. 2 large guards entered the suite instantly. They lifted my parents by their arms, ignoring their sudden wails of protest, and escorted them out of the building. I did not look back as the heavy doors swung shut, sealing them out of my life forever. With the estate finally vacant, I executed the final phase of my strategy. The Connecticut mansion was a massive structure occupying prime real estate, but I had absolutely zero sentimental attachment to its walls. I deployed my legal team to aggressively navigate the municipal zoning boards. Using the immense capital of Apex Holdings, I successfully rezoned the residential plot for high-density commercial use. Within 3 months, I sold the entire property to a luxury commercial developer. They planned to bulldoze the ancestral home and construct an exclusive boutique hotel and spa. The sale closed for triple the original value of the property. I took that massive multi-million-dollar profit and rolled every single cent into expanding the private equity wing of my firm. The past was completely liquidated. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse office, a cup of hot black tea resting in my hand. Below me, the city pulsed with relentless energy, a grid of endless ambition and power. Preston was sitting in a federal holding cell awaiting trial for massive corporate fraud. Richard and Patricia were banished to a cramped, dingy rental apartment on the outskirts of the city, permanently erased from the affluent society that had defined their entire existence. I took a slow sip of my tea, savoring the absolute brilliant quiet of my sanctuary. I was entirely free of their toxic familial chains. I was wealthy, I was victorious, and for the first time in my life, I was completely, undeniably independent. True power does not come from inheriting a legacy, it comes from building your own and having the courage to protect it. The story of Fiona teaches us a harsh but necessary truth about familial boundaries. Blood relation is not a license for exploitation, and shared genetics does not obligate you to finance the delusions of those who actively disrespect you. For years, Fiona endured the shadow of her highly favored brother and the dismissal of her parents. Yet she did not fight their disrespect with petty arguments. She fought it with silent, methodical success. She secured her own financial independence and let her family's arrogance be the very tool of their undoing. When Preston built his house of cards on the foundation of stolen funds, and her parents chose social status over genuine connection, Fiona simply held up the mirror of reality. The most profound lesson here is about the nature of forgiveness and boundaries. Setting an iron wall against toxic family members is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of radical personal preservation. When Richard and Patricia demanded shelter after squandering their lives on a lie, Fiona owed them nothing. She recognized that enabling their behavior would only pull her into their wreckage. By selling the estate and reinvesting in her own empire, she physically and symbolically bulldozed the toxic dynamics of her past. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep your family warm. We all face moments where we must draw a firm line with toxic family members who take our generosity for granted. Choosing your own mental health over heavy familial guilt is an absolute necessity for inner peace. Please share your personal story in the comments section below, hit that like button, and subscribe for more powerful videos.